My name is Elena Varick. In my world, everything is measured in milliseconds and carbon fiber. They say the wind is the only thing that doesn't lie, and I've spent my life learning to speak its language. My father, Marcus Varick, owner of the legendary Varick Racing, saw me as a decorative asset, a face to grace the paddocks and attract sponsors. When I was 18, he found me under the chassis of a GT3, covered in grease and mapping a new fuel injection curve. He didn't see a prodigy, he saw a rebellion. He took my tools, the ones my grandfather had left me, and threw them into the lake, telling me that a Varick woman belongs on a runway, not in a pit lane. He thought he broke my engine that day. He didn't realize he just forced me to build a faster one. 7 years later, his team is a dying relic, and I am the ghost in the machine of his greatest rival. The memory of that night still smells like burnt oil and rainwater. I was 18, and the garage was my cathedral. I had spent 6 months rebuilding an old turbocharger, refining the geometry of the blades to minimize lag. It was a masterpiece of amateur engineering, a proof of concept that I was more than just the Varick princess. "What is this filth, Elena?" My father's voice had cut through the roar of the rain outside. He stood in the doorway of the garage, his expensive Italian suit looking absurd against the backdrop of wrenches and tires. "It's a variable vane housing, Dad. If we implement this on the test car—" "No," he snapped, his face reddening. "We aren't implementing anything. You have a fitting with Vogue tomorrow at 10. You have a brand to maintain. You are a Varick. People want to see you in a cocktail dress, not in a jumpsuit. This obsession ends tonight." I watched, frozen, as he grabbed my custom tool chest, the one with the specialized micrometers and the hand-polished ratchets. He didn't just move them, he dragged them to the edge of the pier behind our estate and tipped them into the black, freezing water of the lake. "Go to your room," he commanded, not even looking back as the tools of my soul sank into the silt. "Learn to be a daughter I can be proud of." That was the last time I cried. I didn't go to the fitting. I went to the bus station with nothing but a backpack and the digital blueprints I had backed up to a hidden cloud drive. I vanished. I changed my name. I worked in greasy back alley shops in Berlin. I studied fluid dynamics under a pseudonym in London, and I clawed my way into the world of Formula One through the service entrance. Now, 7 years later, the sun is setting over the Silverstone circuit, and the air is thick with the scent of high-octane fuel and desperation. Varick Racing is at the bottom of the constructor standings. Their cars are heavy, their aerodynamics are archaic, and their sponsors are fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. My father is here today, not for a race. He's here because he's heard whispers of a technical oracle at Apex Zentora, the team that has dominated the podium all season. He's here to beg for a savior. The paddock at Silverstone is a high-tech hive of carbon fiber and ego. I stood at the back of the Apex Zentora garage, my eyes fixed on the telemetry screens. The Oracle wasn't a myth. It was a sophisticated integration of AI-driven simulation and a deep, intuitive understanding of downforce. My father was walking down the pit lane, his gait slower than I remembered, his shoulders heavy with the weight of impending bankruptcy. He was heading toward our hospitality suite. He had an appointment with my boss, the team principal, to discuss a consulting partnership. "Is he here yet?" Sarah asked. She knew my history. She was the only one who did. "He's at the gate," I said, my voice as cold as the liquid nitrogen we use to cool the tires. On the track, our lead driver was pushing the car through maggots and beckets, the telemetry showing a perfect flat curve of stability. I had designed the floor of this car to create a ground effect seal that shouldn't be possible under current regulations. I hadn't cheated. I had simply found the fine print in the FIA rulebook, the same way I had found the fine print in my father's life. Marcus Varick entered the Apex Zentora suite. He looked around at the pristine white surfaces and the glowing screens with a mixture of envy and awe. He saw my boss, Christian, and extended a hand. "Christian, thank you for seeing me," my father said, his voice lacking its old thunder. "You know the situation. Varick Racing is an institution. If we go under, the sport loses its soul. We need your lead engineer. We've heard this person has found a way to manipulate the wake turbulence that's making everyone else's cars look like they're standing still. I'm prepared to pay any price. Name it." Christian looked at me through the glass partition. I gave a slight nod. "The engineer you're looking for is right through those doors, Marcus. But I should warn you, she's very particular about her tools. She doesn't like them being misplaced." My father pushed through the glass doors. I was standing with my back to him, leaning over a 1.5 scale model of our front wing. I was wearing my team jumpsuit, grease under my nails, a wrench in my hand, the same model he had thrown into the lake 7 years ago. "Excuse me," he said, his tone authoritative but hopeful. "I was told the technical director was in here. I'm Marcus Varick." I turned slowly. The fluorescent lights of the garage glinted off my safety glasses. I took them off, letting them hang around my neck. "Hello, Marcus," I said. The silence that followed was louder than the V10 engines warming up in the neighboring garage. I watched him go through a terrifying sequence of emotions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally a crushing, soul-deep realization. "Elena?" he whispered. His eyes traveled from my face to the Apex Zentora logo on my chest, then to the computer screens displaying the most advanced aerodynamic data in the world. "You're the Oracle?" he whispered. "The Oracle is just a girl who didn't want to be a model, Dad," I said, stepping toward him. I held up the wrench. "It took me 3 years to find an exact replacement for the one you threw away. I had to earn the money in a garage in East London, cleaning oil pans for £5 an hour, while you were telling the press I was finding myself in Paris." He looked like he had been struck. He reached out to touch the scale model, but I moved it away. "Don't," I said. "This is precision engineering. You wouldn't want to get your thorn spirit all over it, or whatever you call your arrogance these days." "Elena, I didn't know," he stammered. "If I had known you had this kind of talent—" "You did know. You saw me under that chassis. You saw the turbos. You just didn't think a woman's talent was worth as much as a woman's face. You wanted a doll, and instead you created the person who is going to ensure Varick Racing never sees a podium again." "You can't be serious," he said, his voice trembling. "You'd destroy your own family's legacy? Everything I built?" "You didn't build it, Marcus. My grandfather built it. You just spent it. And now I've refined it. I've taken everything he taught me, and I've turned it into a weapon. Every time your cars take a corner and lose 0.2 of a second, that's me. Every time your DRS fails to trigger because of the wake I've designed, that's me. I'm not just a consultant you can hire. I'm the reason you have to beg. I leaned in close, so close I could see the fine lines of age and failure on his skin. You came here to pay any price, right? Here's the price. You announce your retirement tonight. You sell Varick Racing to Apex Zentora for $1. We'll keep the name, but we'll fire your entire management board. And you go back to that lake and think about those tools. Maybe you can find a model to tell you how beautiful you look while you're losing everything. I put my safety glasses back on and turned back to my screens. Christian, show Mr. Varick out, I said, my voice steady and cold. The wind is changing, and I have a race to win. He stood there for a long time, a broken man in a high-tech cathedral. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing like a slow, rhythmic defeat. I watched him on the security feed as he left the paddock, a small figure disappearing into the shadow of the grandstands. I felt no joy, but only a profound sense of balance. The girl in the grease was gone. The model was never real. There was only the oracle, the wind, and the finish line.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
They say that a cornered predator is at its most dangerous, but they forget that a predator blinded by its own ego is even more predictable. My father didn't leave the Silverstone paddock that night as a defeated man seeking redemption. He left as a desperate man seeking a shortcut. He looked at the Apex Zentora garage not as a marvel of engineering, but as a vault he could crack. He thought that because he shared my blood, he had a natural right to my brain. But in the high-stakes world of Formula One, blood is just another fluid. And right now, his was leaking out of a failing engine. The days following the confrontation were a blur of high-velocity testing. We had moved the operation to our private facility in Brackley. The air in the wind tunnel was a constant, controlled gale, a 200-mile-per-hour storm that I manipulated with the flick of a finger. I was standing in the observation deck, watching the smoke tracers flow over the rear wing of our Project Chimera car. The lines were smooth, laminar, and beautiful. It was a masterpiece of aeroelasticity. "Elena, we've detected a breach," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she leaned over my shoulder. "Someone is trying to access the CAD server from an external IP. It's using a legacy Varick Racing credential, high-level clearance." I didn't blink. I didn't even look away from the smoke tracers. Which one? My grandfather's old master key? Exactly. It's coming from the Varick estate. He's trying to download the floor geometry for the Bahrain GP. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. I had been waiting for this. I knew Marcus wouldn't accept my terms. He thought he could liberate my designs and hire a team of second-rate engineers to reverse engineer them. He still saw me as the girl whose tools he could throw into a lake. He didn't realize that I had spent 7 years building digital fortresses. "Let him in, Sarah," I said. "What? Elena, if he gets the floor schematics, he can fix his downforce issues in a week. They'll be back in the midfield by the next race." "He won't get the schematics, Sarah. He'll get the ghost. Initiate the Trojan layer I built into the encrypted CAD files. Give him full access to the folder labeled Aerodynamics 3.2. Let him think he's won." The ghost was a piece of code I had written during my lonely nights in Berlin. It was a perfect, beautiful lie. On a screen, the schematics looked revolutionary. They appeared to solve the porpoising issues that were plaguing every team on the grid. but the geometry was fundamentally flawed in a way that only a wind tunnel test at precisely 180 miles per hour would reveal. It didn't just fail, it created a catastrophic aerodynamic stall that would render the car undrivable at high speed. It was digital poison wrapped in a carbon fiber bow. I watched the data transfer bar on Sarah's monitor. The file was large, heavy with the weight of my father's desperation. He was stealing my legacy again, just like he had stolen my mother's peace and my grandfather's pride. "Transfer complete," Sarah breathed. "He's gone. He thinks he's the king of the world again." "I think he's found a shortcut," I said, turning back to the wind tunnel. "But in aerodynamics, there are no shortcuts, only the air and the truth it tells. Let's see how long it takes him to realize he's holding a bomb." 3 days later, the news broke in the racing trades. Varick Racing had announced a miracle upgrade for the upcoming Spanish Grand Prix. The press was ecstatic. Marcus Varick was back on camera, looking rejuvenated, talking about the undying spirit of Varick innovation. He even had the audacity to mention me, obliquely. He told a reporter that the family is finally aligned on the vision for the future. I watched the clip on my phone while sitting in the pit lane at Barcelona. The heat was shimmering off the asphalt. Across the way, the Varick Racing garage was a hive of frantic activity. I could see the mechanics bolting on the new floor, the ghost floor. My father was standing there, arms crossed, looking at his lead driver, a talented but frustrated young man named Leo Rossi. Leo was the only reason that team was still scoring any points at all. He deserved better than to be a test pilot for a stolen, sabotaged dream. I walked across the pit lane. The security guards at the Varick garage tried to block me, but Marcus saw me and waved them off. He had a look of smug triumph that made my skin crawl. "Changed your mind, Elena? Come to see the masterpiece? We've already run the simulations. The downforce numbers are off the charts. We're going to be 3/10 faster in Sector 3. "Simulations are just math, Marcus," I said, stepping into the garage. I looked at the floor of the car. It looked perfect. Every curve, every strake was exactly as I designed it, in the trap. But the track is reality, and the track doesn't care about your numbers. You're just upset because we found a way to bridge the gap without your terms, he whispered, leaning in so the press couldn't hear. "I still have friends in the IT department, Elena. You should have changed the old man's passwords." "I did change them, Dad. I changed them to exactly what I knew you would try to use. I didn't lock the door. I just made sure the floor was rigged to collapse the moment you stepped inside." His smile didn't fade, but I saw a flicker of doubt in his pupils. He gestured to Leo Rossi, who was climbing into the cockpit. "Watch the telemetry, Elena. Watch a real Varick take the lead." "I'll be watching, Marcus," I said, turning to leave. "But I won't be watching the lead. I'll be watching the telemetry for Sector 9. That's where the air turns against you. Tell Leo to be careful. At 200 miles per hour, a miracle can turn into a funeral, very quickly." I walked back to the Apex Zentora garage and put on my headset. The practice session began. The Varick car screamed out of the pits, the engine howling. On my screen, I pulled up their live telemetry, a gift from a back door I had left in the stolen files. Leo was fast. Sector 1, purple. Sector 2, purple. He was flying. The Varick mechanics were cheering. My father was looking at the monitors like he had found the Holy Grail. But then came Sector 3, the high-speed sweepers. At 190 miles per hour, the ghost geometry hit its critical oscillation point. The airflow under the car didn't just attach, it reversed. On the screen, the downforce graph didn't just dip, it plummeted to 0. "He's losing the rear," Sarah yelled. On the track, Leo Rossi's car suddenly behaved as if it were on ice. The back end stepped out with violent, unpredictable force. Leo was a master, his hands a blur as he fought to catch the slide, but physics was no longer on his side. The car spun, a white and blue blur, narrowly missing the barrier and sliding into the gravel trap. The silence in the Varick garage was deafening. I looked at my father. He was staring at the screen, his face as pale as the carbon dust on the track. He looked at the telemetry, seeing the catastrophic failure of the very thing he thought would save him. He looked across the pit lane and saw me. I didn't rave. I didn't smile. I just tapped my temple and went back to work. He had stolen a ghost, and now he was standing in the middle of a graveyard. The war wasn't over, but the first casualty was his last red of hope.
The world of Formula One is a shark tank where the water is scented with blood and burning rubber. After the catastrophic failure in Barcelona, the Varick racing brand didn't just stumble, it flatlined. The miracle upgrade that my father had stolen was now being called the Varick Death Trap in every sports column from London to Monaco. Sponsors were pulling their logos off the car faster than a pit crew changes tires. My father was no longer a legend, he was a liability. And in this industry, when a giant falls, the scavengers don't wait for him to stop breathing. But this time, the lead scavenger was me. I sat in the boardroom of the Apex Zentora headquarters, a space of cold glass and chrome that overlooked the main assembly floor. My team principal, Christian, pushed a thick folder across the table. It was a formal offer for a hostile takeover of Varick Racing. "The creditors are screaming, Elena," Christian said, his voice measured. "They've triggered the default clauses. We can buy the entire operation, the factory, the wind tunnel, and the entry license for pennies on the dollar. But I'm not signing this until I know what's actually left in those buildings. I need a full technical audit." "You want me to go back there?" I said, my voice flat. "I want the person who knows their weaknesses better than anyone else to tell me if we're buying a future or just a pile of scrap metal. Go to the Varick estate, Elena. Check the private archives. If your father has any more ghosts hidden in his servers, I want them purged before we move in." Driving back to the Varick estate felt like descending into a dream I had spent 7 years trying to forget. The long, winding driveway was flanked by ancient oaks that seemed to lean in, whispering about the girl who ran away. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was driving a company supercar, wearing a uniform that represented the pinnacle of the sport, and I had the power of a multi-billion-dollar corporation behind me. I pulled up to the main garage, the cathedral of my youth. It was quiet now. No air guns whining, no smell of fresh paint. Just the heavy, oppressive scent of dust and failure. I stepped inside. The lights flickered on, revealing the skeletons of old race cars covered in gray tarps. In the corner stood the workbench where it had all ended. It was empty. The lake was still there, visible through the large glass doors, a cold, dark mirror reflecting the gray sky. "I knew you'd come back to see the wreckage," a voice rasped from the shadows. My father emerged from the small office above the shop floor. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm not here for the wreckage, Marcus," I said, opening my laptop and connecting to the main diagnostic port of the facility. "I'm here for the audit. Apex Zentora is moving to acquire the assets. I'm the lead technician for the transition." "Acquire?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You mean scavenge. You're coming to pick the gold out of your father's teeth. Does it feel good, Elena? Does it feel like victory to stand in the place where I raised you and plan its destruction?" "I destroyed this place the night you threw my life into that lake," I said, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I bypassed his encryption. "I'm just here to see if there's anything worth saving for the new owners, and so far the data looks as stagnant as the water out there." I began the deep scan of the Varick servers. I was looking for the legacy files, my grandfather's original designs for the 1990 championship-winning engine. Those were the real treasures, the pure engineering that my father had never understood and likely tried to modernize into oblivion. As the progress bar crawled across my screen, I walked over to a car under a tarp in the center of the room. I pulled it back. It was the GT3 chassis I had been working on 7 years ago. It was exactly as I had left it, half-assembled, rusted in places, a monument to an interrupted life. I couldn't bring myself to scrap it, Marcus said, standing at the edge of the light. Even after you left, I told myself I was keeping it as a reminder of your rebellion, but maybe I was just waiting for the day you'd come back and finish it. Don't try to rewrite history, Dad, I said, not looking at him. You kept it because you were too lazy to move it, or because you thought you could eventually hire someone to finish my work and put your name on it. But you couldn't, could you? No one else could figure out the fuel mapping I'd designed. No, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. No one could. We tried 4 different engineers. They all said the math was unorthodox. They said it shouldn't work. It works because I don't follow the wind, Marcus. I lead it. A sharp beep from my laptop signaled the completion of the scan. I looked at the screen and my heart stopped. Tucked away in a hidden partition, labeled only with my birth date, was a massive cache of files. It wasn't just my grandfather's work, it was a series of video logs. I clicked the first one. It was my father 5 years ago. He looked younger, healthier. He was sitting at this very workbench. Elena, his digital voice filled the quiet garage. I know you're out there. I've been following the results in the junior leagues. I see your hand in those designs. I was a fool. I thought I could protect you from this world, the politics, the stress, the constant threat of failure. I thought a Varick woman deserved a life of luxury because I didn't think I could survive seeing you break under the pressure of the paddock. But I see now that you're the only one of us who truly has the fire. I'm keeping your chassis. I'm keeping your files. If I ever lose everything, I hope it's to you, because you're the only one who deserves the name. I closed the laptop slowly. The cold, sharp anger that had sustained me for 7 years felt a sudden, strange tremor. He hadn't just been a villain, he had been a coward, a man so afraid for his daughter that he tried to kill her dream to keep her safe. It didn't excuse what he did. It didn't bring my tools back from the bottom of the lake, but it changed the geometry of my revenge. I looked at him standing there in the shadows, waiting for my judgment. The audit is complete, I said, my voice shaking just enough for him to hear. The assets are technically insolvent, but the intellectual property, the hidden files, they have a value that Christian doesn't know about. What are you going to do, Elena? I'm going to finish the audit, and then I'm going to make sure that when Varick Racing dies, it dies with its dignity intact, not as a trophy for Apex Centaura, but as the foundation of something you were always too afraid to let me build. I walked out of the garage, leaving him alone with the ghosts. The takeover was still happening, but the terms were about to change. I wasn't just a scavenger anymore. I was the architect of a resurrection.
In the high-pressure world of elite engineering, sentimentality is usually seen as a structural flaw. When I walked back into the Apex Centaura headquarters with a new proposal, I knew I was walking into a headwind. Christian expected a list of assets to liquidate. Instead, I gave him a manifesto for a resurrection. I didn't want to bury Varick Racing. I wanted to gut it, refine it, and turn it into a skunkworks division, a laboratory for the kind of radical ideas that the main team was too conservative to try. But Christian is a man who trusts chronometers, not heartbeats. He gave me a choice: prove the viability of my unorthodox mapping on the old GT3 chassis, or follow the original plan and sell my father's legacy for parts. The test track at Silverstone was shrouded in an early morning mist. It was private, silent, and cold. On one side of the pit lane sat the Apex Centaura flagship, a multi-million-dollar marvel of modern F1 technology, driven by the team's top development pilot. On the other side sat my Phoenix, the old GT3 chassis from my father's garage. It looked like a relic, but underneath its scarred bodywork was the fuel mapping and turbine geometry I had spent 7 years perfecting in my mind. You're putting your reputation on a car that's been sitting under a tarp since the late 2010s, Elena? Christian asked, his voice echoing in the empty garage.
If this car stalls, or worse, if the engine blows, the Varick brand becomes worthless, and your position as technical director will be precarious. The chassis is old, but the physics are timeless, Christian, I replied, tightening the bolts on the custom intake manifold. My father threw my tools away because he was afraid of this car. He was afraid it would prove that I didn't need his name to win. Today, we find out if he was right. I had spent 72 hours straight in the Varick garage, working alongside Sarah and a few hand-picked mechanics who still had the old fire in them. We didn't just repair the GT3, we transformed it. I implemented a hybrid energy recovery system that used the heat from the exhaust to pre-spool the turbo, a concept the industry said was too unstable for a combustion engine. The engine I chose for the Phoenix wasn't a professional. It was Leo Rossi. He had walked away from Varick Racing after the Barcelona crash, his spirit broken. When I called him, I told him one thing. I have a car that listens. He arrived at the track at 4 a.m., looking at the GT3 as if it were a ghost. "It's beautiful, Alina," Leo whispered, running his hand over the carbon fiber. "But can it handle the Apex Ventura pace? It doesn't have to beat them in a straight line, Leo. It has to beat them in the corners. The Phoenix breathes with the track. It uses the wake of the car in front to increase its own cooling efficiency. Go out there and show them what unorthodox looks like." The engines roared to life. The Apex car had a high-pitched, clinical scream. My Phoenix had a deep, guttural growl that felt like a predator waking up from a long sleep. As they pulled out onto the track, the contrast was jarring. The Apex car was a surgical instrument. My car was a force of nature. The test was simple. 10 laps. If the Phoenix stayed within 2 seconds of the flagship, the Varick Apex partnership would be signed. If it fell behind, the wrecking balls would move into the Varick factory by sunset. Laps 1 to 3 were a study of frustration. The Apex car pulled away on every straightaway, its superior horsepower leaving Leo in a cloud of digital dust. Christian looked at his stopwatch and shook his head. "The gap is 4 seconds, Elena. It's a brave effort, but you can't outrun time." "Wait for the tires to heat up, Christian," I said, my eyes fixed on the telemetry. "The Phoenix doesn't just use fuel, it uses heat. Watch Sector 2. On lap 5, the geometry of the race changed. As the Phoenix's thermal recovery system hit its optimal temperature, the car began to behave differently. Leo wasn't fighting the car anymore. He was flowing with it. Through the high-speed sweepers of Maggots and Beckett's, the Phoenix didn't lose downforce in the wake of the lead car. It thrived. The gap began to shrink. 4 seconds, 3, 2.5. Leo was taking lines that shouldn't have been possible. He was braking later, carrying more speed through the Apex, and exiting with a violent electric-assisted burst of torque. The telemetry on my screen was a work of art. The air was sticking to the car as if it were glued there. "How is he doing that?" Christian asked, leaning over the monitor. "The drag coefficient should be spiking at those angles." "The bodywork is active, Christian. I'm using the air pressure itself to deform the winglets. The car is changing its shape to match the wind. It's what my father called rebellion. I call it evolution." On the final lap, the Phoenix was on the gearbox of the multi-million-dollar flagship. Leo pulled a daring move on the inside of Brooklyn's, the old GT3 screaming as it found a patch of grip that the modern car's sensors hadn't even detected. They crossed the line side by side. The gap? 0.04 seconds. The garage was silent. Christian looked from the stopwatch to me and then to the old, scarred car cooling down on the pit lane. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he pulled a pen from his pocket and signed the bottom of the Varick Apex contract. "The Skunk Works is yours, Alina," he said, his voice full of a rare, genuine respect. "But I have one condition. Your father, he stays away from the engineering. He can be a global ambassador for the brand, but he never touches a wrench again." "He wouldn't know what to do with one anyway, Christian," I said, looking out at the track. As the sun broke through the mist, I saw a familiar figure standing near the grandstands. It was my father. He hadn't come to interfere, he had come to watch. He saw the phoenix, he saw the win, and for the first time in 7 years, he didn't look like a man trying to be a legend. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his daughter hadn't just built a faster car, she had built a better world.
In racing, a fraction of a second is the difference between glory and a heap of smoldering carbon fiber. But in the boardroom, a single line of corrupted code can be just as lethal. After the Phoenix proved its worth, the Varick-Apex partnership became the talk of the paddock. We were moving at light speed to prepare for the Monaco Grand Prix, the crown jewel of the season. But as I began the process of integrating the old Varick infrastructure into our new high-security network, I realized that the rot in my father's company went much deeper than poor engineering. There were people who had profited from Varick Racing's decline, and they weren't about to let me clean the house without a fight. The atmosphere in the newly renovated Varick-Apex facility was electric, yet tense. I had moved my primary team into the old factory, and the clash of cultures was visible in every corridor. My elite, data-driven engineers from Apex Zentora walked past the veteran Varick mechanics who still smelled of tobacco and old-school grease. I was in the nerve center, the glass-walled mission control, monitoring the final simulation for the Monaco Aero package. "Elena, we have a synchronization error," Sarah said, her brow furrowed as she stared at the main array. "The fuel flow mapping for Leo's car is drifting. It's not a hardware glitch. Someone is manually overriding the injection constants in the master kernel." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. The fuel flow mapping was the heart of the Phoenix technology. If it was altered by even a few milligrams, the engine wouldn't just lose power, it would self-destruct under the high-pressure loads of the Monte Carlo street circuit. "Trace the terminal," commanded. "Now." "It's coming from inside the building, Elena, an authorized login from the old executive wing." I didn't wait for security team. I knew exactly where that login originated. I walked through the factory floor, my boots echoing on the polished concrete. I reached the mahogany-paneled corridor of the old guard, the men my father had kept on the payroll long after they had stopped being useful. These were the directors who had spent years lining their pockets with sponsor money while the team's performance plummeted. I kicked open the door to the office of Thomas Thorne, the former CFO. He was standing over a laptop, his face pale in the glow of the screen. "Move away from the computer, Thorne," I said, my voice vibrating with a dangerous calm. "Elena, I was just checking the budget allocations for the freight to Monaco," he stammered, trying to close the lid. I didn't argue. I grabbed his collar and forced him aside. I looked at the screen. He wasn't looking at budgets. He was in the middle of a delete and corrupt command on the primary engine management server. He'd already wiped 40% of our unique simulation data that was worth tens of millions of dollars. "Why?" I asked, looking at the man who had known me since I was a child. "Family?" Thorne spat, the mask of the polite executive finally slipping. "Your father was a fool who played at being a legend while the world moved on. We had a good thing here, Elena. We had consulting contracts. We had suppliers who gave us kickbacks for using their substandard parts. Then you come back with your Oracle nonsense and your cleanup crews. You're not just changing the cars, you're ending our way of life. If we can't have Varick Racing, nobody will."
He had been selling our technical secrets to a midfield rival, and now that he knew the takeover would expose his embezzlement, he was trying to burn the digital house down. The Phoenix was being assassinated by a man who couldn't even tell you what an apex was. "You think a delete command can stop me?" I whispered. "I spent 7 years living in shadows, Thorn. I never keep only one copy of anything." I pulled a small silver drive from my pocket, the same drive that held the backups from my Berlin days. "I've already alerted the authorities about the financial discrepancies in the 90s trust. And as for the servers, you didn't delete the data. You just moved it into a honeypot partition I created the moment I took over the network. You didn't sabotage the car. You just signed your own arrest warrant." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're not an engineer, Thorn. You're a parasite. And the thing about parasites is that they die when the host gets strong again." Security arrived and led him out. But as the room fell quiet, I realized the damage was psychological. My team was shaken. The old guard had poisoned the atmosphere. I walked back to the factory floor and called an all-hands meeting. I stood on a packing crate, looking at the 200 men and women who were now my responsibility. Some people think that a racing team is built on history. It's not. It's built on trust. Today, someone tried to kill this team from the inside. They failed because the wind doesn't care about politics. It only cares about the truth. I saw my father standing at the back of the crowd. He looked at Thorn being led away in handcuffs, and then he looked at me. For the first time, he didn't look like he wanted to lead. He looked like he wanted to follow. "We leave for Monaco in 48 hours. We are short on data, we are short on time, and the entire world thinks we're a circus. But we have the Phoenix, and we have something our rivals don't. We have nothing left to lose. Back to work. We have a throne to reclaim." As the crowd dispersed and the air guns began to whine again, my father walked up to me. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He handed it to me. Inside was a wrench, a vintage, hand-polished chrome wrench, the exact model he'd thrown into the lake 7 years earlier. "I hired a dive team," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It took them 3 days. They found the original set in the silt. I had them restored. It's not an apology, Elena. It's just, I want you to have the right tools for Monaco." I looked at the wrench and then at him. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I took the tool and tucked it into my jumpsuit. "Get to the airport, Marcus. You have a brand to represent. I have a car to build." The sabotage had failed, but the real test was waiting in the narrow, sun-drenched streets of Monaco. The Phoenix was ready to fly, but I knew, in Monaco, the walls are always closer than they appear.
Monaco is not a racetrack. It is a claustrophobic, high-speed labyrinth made of steel, luxury, and unforgiving stone. For an aerodynamicist, it is a nightmare. In the open plains of Silverstone, the air is your friend. You can shape it, laminar and smooth. But in the narrow canyons of Monte Carlo, the air is turbulent, chopped up by ancient buildings and erratic sea breezes. To win here, you don't just need downforce, you need a car that can dance on a knife's edge. I had designed a radical active suspension system that adjusted the car's rake in real time, allowing it to squat into the corners and leap out of them. It was the most complex thing I had ever built, and as the sun rose over the Mediterranean, I knew that today the Phoenix would either become a legend or a very expensive pile of scrap.
The atmosphere in the Monte Carlo paddock was suffocating. The scent of salt water mingled with the smell of scorched tires and high-end perfume. Varick Apex occupied the smallest garage in the pit lane, a David among Goliaths. Every time I stepped out of the hospitality suite, the cameras followed me. The media didn't care about the rake angles or the suspension geometry. They wanted the soap opera. They wanted to see if the disinherited daughter could really save the failing father. The sensors on the rear left damper are showing a 0.2 millisecond lag. In the swimming pool section, that's the difference between hitting the apex and hitting the wall. Recalibrate the hydraulic valve, I said, my eyes fixed on the track map. We need that car to be as reactive as a nerve ending. Leo is going to have to graze the barriers at 160 miles per hour. He needs to trust that the car will move exactly when his brain does. My father was surprisingly quiet. He didn't hover over the telemetry or try to charm the sponsors. He spent most of the morning in the back of the garage, polishing the chrome wheels of the Phoenix with a rag. It was a humble, manual task, the kind of work he used to say was beneath a Varick. "The press is asking for a statement about the sabotage investigation," he said, not looking up from his work. "I told them to talk to the police. I told them my only focus is supporting my technical director." I looked at him, surprised by the lack of ego in his voice. "Thank you, Marcus. That's helpful." "I saw the telemetry from the simulator last night, Elena. The way you've mapped the car for the Grand Hotel hairpin, it's not engineering, it's poetry. Your grandfather would have wept to see it." I didn't have time to process the compliment. The pit exit light turned green. "Leo, you're clear for qualifying," I said into the radio. "Remember, the car is an extension of your hands. If you feel the vibration in the steering rack, trust the active rake. It will pull you through." Qualifying in Monaco is the most stressful hour in sports. The streets are so narrow that there is no room for error. Leo Rossi was on a flyer. On the monitors, his car looked like a silver and blue blur, dancing inches from the Armco. Sector 1, purple. He was the fastest man on track. Sector 2, purple. Through the tunnel, the Phoenix screamed, its active aero flattening the car to the ground against the sudden change in air pressure. "He's on pace for pole position," Christian whispered, his hand gripping the back of my chair. "This is impossible. A week ago, this team didn't even have a functioning server." Then it happened. Coming out of the tobacco corner, Leo pushed just a fraction too hard. The rear left tire clipped a raised curb, the one I had warned him about. The car didn't spin, but the sudden impact sent a shock wave through the active suspension. The telemetry on my screen turned red. "I've lost the dampening," Leo's voice crackled over the radio, laced with panic. "The car is pogoing. I can't hold the line." I watched in horror as the Phoenix veered into the wall at the swimming pool chicane. The sound of the impact reached the garage a second later, a sickening crunch of carbon fiber and shattered dreams. "Leo, status!" I shouted into the radio. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. "I'm okay," he finally gasped, "but the car... Elena, I'm so sorry. The front left corner is gone. The suspension arm is through the chassis." The garage went cold. We had exactly 2 hours before the final qualifying session, and the car was a wreck. In Monaco, if you don't qualify in the top 10, you might as well not show up for the race. Overtaking is impossible. "It's over," Christian sighed, looking at the wreckage being hoisted onto a crane on the big screen. "We don't have the spare parts for the active suspension manifolds. They were custom machined." "We have the tools," I said, standing up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "And we have the original GT3 manifolds in the freight container. They're heavier and they're manual, but they'll fit." "Elena, that's a legacy part," Sarah argued. "You'd have to rewrite the entire control software in 90 minutes. "Then we rewrite it," I said, grabbing my tool roll, the one my father had recovered from the lake. I looked at the mechanics. "We are Varick Apex. We don't quit because the wall was closer than we thought. Marcus, I need you." He dropped the rag and stood up, his eyes widening.
What do you need me to do? You know these old manifolds better than anyone. You installed them on the prototypes 30 years ago. Get under that car and start stripping the damaged hydraulics. I'll handle the code. Sarah, get the heat guns. We're going to bake a new mapping into the ECU right here in the pit. For the next 90 minutes, the garage was a blur of controlled chaos. There was no technical director and global ambassador. There were just two people named Varric, covered in grease, fighting to save a name. My father worked with a precision I hadn't seen in years, his hands moving with the muscle memory of a master mechanic. I worked beside him, my laptop balanced on a tire rack, my fingers flying across the keys as I translated the modern aero loads into the language of 30-year-old steel. With 3 minutes to spare, we fired up the engine. It sounded different, rougher, more violent, but it was alive. Leo, get in, I said, wiping a smear of oil from my forehead. The car is heavy and it's going to kick like a mule, but it won't fail you. Go out there and take what's ours. Leo climbed into the cockpit, looked at me, then at my father, and nodded. As the Phoenix pulled out of the garage, the crowd in the grandstands began to roar. We hadn't won the race yet, but we had already survived the crash. Now the gamble was simple. Could a girl's digital genius and a father's old-school grit hold together at 170 miles per hour through the streets of a billionaire's playground?
They say that in Monaco, the weather is as fickle as the gamblers and the casinos. We had spent the night rebuilding the Phoenix from the marrow up, blending my high-tech algorithms with the ironclad mechanical parts my father had salvaged. We qualified at the back of the grid, a consequence of the crash, but the mood in the garage wasn't one of defeat. It was a strange, quiet defiance. And then, an hour before the lights were set to go out, the Mediterranean sky turned the color of bruised slate. The first drops of rain hit the asphalt, not as a drizzle, but as a deluge. In an instant, the race transformed from a test of speed into a test of survival. And survival is where the Varric blood has always thrived. The sound of the rain on the corrugated roof of the pit lane was a rhythmic drumming, like a war march. Every team was scrambling, their high-tech tire warmers struggling against the sudden drop in track temperature. My monitors were flooded with data, viscosity levels, water clearance rates, and tire degradation curves. "The track is a river, Elena," Leo's voice crackled through my headset. He was sitting in the cockpit, his visor already fogging. "The spray from the cars ahead is going to be a wall of white. I won't see the braking markers." "The Phoenix was built for the storm, Leo," I replied, my eyes fixed on the weather radar. "I've activated the hydroflow channels. I'm going to use the engine's vacuum to literally suck the standing water away from the front tires. It's an untested system, and it drains 10% of your top-end power, but it will give you a clear line where everyone else is aquaplaning." "You want to use the car as a vacuum cleaner at 150 miles per hour?" Christian asked, his face pale as he looked over my shoulder. "If those seals fail, the engine will ingest water and explode. You're risking everything on a theory." I looked at my father. He was standing by the telemetry rack, his hands folded. He knew the risks. He had seen engines die in the rain 100 times. "The theory is sound, Christian," his voice surprisingly steady, "but it requires a pilot who can feel the grip through the soles of his boots. Leo, the car is going to feel heavy, like it's being pulled into the asphalt. Don't fight the weight. Use it." "Copy that. Let's go hunting." The race started behind the safety car, a slow, frustrating parade through the mist. But when the lights finally went green, the chaos was immediate. In the middle of the pack, 3 cars collided at St. Devote, unable to find grip on the slick painted lines. Leo navigated the wreckage like a surgeon, the Phoenix's active rake system keeping the chassis perfectly level, while others were sliding like hockey pucks. By lap 15, the hydroflow was working better than I had dared to hope. While the leaders were struggling with dirty air and massive spray, Leo was carving through the field. He moved from 20th to 12th, then to 8th. The commentators were losing their minds. No one had ever seen a car handle the wet towback corner with such aggressive stability. "Elena, the intake temperature is rising," Sarah warned. "The vacuum seals are working too hard. We're picking up debris from the track, bits of carbon fiber from the earlier crashes. If the filter clogs, the engine will suffocate." "Leo, back off the revs in the tunnel," I commanded. "We need to clear the intakes. Use the vibration from the curbs at the chicane to shake the debris loose." "I can't back off," Leo shouted back. "The Ferrari is right on my gearbox, and I'm closing on the podium. If I lose momentum now, the tires will cool down and I'll lose the thermal window." "He's right," Marcus intervened, leaning over the radio. "Elena, don't play it safe. If you back off now, you're just waiting for the car to fail. We have to go for the Sovereign's pace. Tell him to open the bypass valves. Let the engine breathe everything, water, grit, whatever. It's a Varick block. It was cast in fire. It won't die from a little rain." I looked at the data. The engine stress levels were in the red. The safe thing to do was to pit and clean the filters, settling for a respectable top 10 finish. But I didn't come back to Oakhaven or Silverstone to be respectable. I came to be absolute. "Do it," I whispered. "Leo, open the bypass. Give me everything the Phoenix has." The next 20 laps were a blur of adrenaline and terror. Leo was a demon. He passed the world champion on the outside of the casino square, a move so daring the crowd's roar drowned out the engines. The Phoenix was screaming now, a raw mechanical howl that sounded like it was tearing itself apart, but the lap times were falling. 3rd place, 2nd place. On the final lap, the rain began to stop, but the track was at its most treacherous, half dry, half soaked. The leader, driving the flagship Apex Zentora, was struggling with tire graining. Leo was on his tail, the Phoenix's hydroflow still carving a path through the remaining puddles. As they rounded the Rascasse for the final time, Leo lunged. It wasn't a move based on aerodynamics, it was a move based on the old-school grit my father had instilled in the chassis and the digital precision I had baked into the software. The two cars touched, carbon fiber grinding against carbon fiber, but the Phoenix held its line. Leo crossed the finish line first. The garage erupted. Sarah was screaming, Christian was hugging the mechanics, and the press was already storming the gates. But I just sat there, my hands still hovering over the keyboard, staring at the telemetry. The engine had died exactly 3 seconds after the finish line. It had given everything it had, down to the last molecular bond. I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. I turned and saw my father. There were tears in his eyes. Real tears, not the crocodile ones he used for sponsors. "You did it, Elena," he said, his voice thick. "You didn't just win a race, you proved that the wind doesn't just listen to you, it respects you." "We did it, Marcus," I said, finally letting out the breath I had been holding since I was 18. But as the celebrations began, I saw a group of FIA officials walking toward our garage. They weren't carrying a trophy, they were carrying a technical protest. The hydroflow system, the very thing that had won us the race, was under investigation. The battle on the track was over, but the final fight for the Varick legacy was moving to the one place I hated more than the runway.
Victory in Monaco usually tastes like champagne and salt air, but for me, it tasted like ozone and static. As Leo Rossi stood atop the podium, drenched in the roar of the crowd, I was already a mile away in a windowless room, facing a panel of FIA technical delegates. They looked like high priests of a dying religion, clutching their thick rule books as if they were sacred scriptures. In their eyes, my hydroflow system wasn't an innovation, it was a transgression. They wanted to strip us of the win, to erase the Phoenix from the history books, and to prove that the old guard still controlled the wind. But they forgot one thing. I didn't just study the rules. I built the world the rules were meant to govern. The air in the hearing room was cold and smelled of expensive paper. 5 men sat behind a long mahogany table, their faces as rigid as the carbon fiber wings they spent their lives inspecting. At the center sat Jean-Pierre, the technical delegate, a man who had once told my father that aerodynamics is for people who can't build engines. "Ms. Varick," Jean-Pierre began, his voice like dry parchment. "The protest filed by Apex, Zentora, and Ferrari is quite specific. They claim your hydroflow vacuum system violates Article 3.15 of the technical regulations, which prohibits movable aerodynamic devices or systems that use the engine's internal airflow to influence external aerodynamics. You used the engine to suck water from the track. That, by definition, influenced the car's performance." I sat across from them, my father to my right and Christian to my left. Christian looked nervous. The prospect of a post-race disqualification was a PR nightmare. But my father? He was calm. He looked at the delegates with a steady, almost pitying gaze. "The hydroflow system is not an aerodynamic device, Jean-Pierre," I said, my voice steady, echoing through the silent room. "It is a safety-critical cooling and intake management system. The fact that it cleared a path for the tires was a secondary, incidental kinetic effect. If you look at the technical blueprints—" "We have looked at the blueprints, Elena," Jean-Pierre interrupted, sliding a holographic projection of my engine across the table. "The vacuum seals are linked to the throttle position. That is a direct link between the power unit and the aerodynamic footprint of the car. It is illegal." I stood up and walked to the projection. I tapped a specific mode in the intake manifold, the part my father and I had hand-bolted in the garage just 24 hours ago. "This node," I pointed, "is a pressure relief valve. Its primary function is to prevent water ingestion, a catastrophic event that would have led to an engine failure in the middle of a high-speed street circuit. I designed it to protect the driver. In Monaco, standing water is a terminal hazard. I didn't create an aerodynamic advantage, I mitigated a lethal risk. The rules state that systems designed primarily for the purpose of safety are exempt from Article 3.15. "A convenient interpretation," one of the other delegates sneered. "But that gave you 3 seconds a lap in the wet. That is an advantage." "The advantage didn't come from the vacuum." My father's voice broke the tension. He stood up, his presence filling the room in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. "You are not trying to disqualify a car. You are trying to disqualify courage. And if you do that, you don't have a sport anymore. You have a laboratory for cowards." The delegates whispered among themselves. I could see the cracks in their resolution. I didn't stop. I pulled up the telemetry from the final lap, the moment the engine died. "Look at this data," I said, my finger tracing the falling line of the internal pressure. The system was so inefficient at creating downforce that it destroyed itself. It was a one-time-use safety mechanism. If I wanted to cheat, I would have built something that didn't turn my engine into a 500-pound paperweight the moment it crossed the line. I gambled on a safety system that barely held together. That's not a movable device. That's a miracle of desperation. Jean-Pierre stared at the screen. He looked at the ruins of the engine data, seeing the raw, violent stress the Phoenix had endured. He looked at me, and then at Marcus. For a moment, the room felt like it was suspended in the same vacuum I had created on the track. "We will deliberate," he said finally. We waited in the hallway for what felt like an eternity. The sounds of the podium celebration were fading, replaced by the clatter of crews packing up the hospitality units. I leaned against the cold stone wall, the weight of the last 7 years finally settling on my shoulders. "Elena," Marcus said, stepping beside me, "whatever they decide, it doesn't matter. The world saw what you did. They saw the Phoenix rise. They saw that a Varick woman doesn't just belong on a runway, she belongs at the top of the mountain." I just wanted to prove that I was right, Marcus. I just wanted the wind to tell the truth. It did, Elena, and so did you. The doors opened. Jean-Pierre stepped out holding a single sheet of paper. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "The protest is dismissed," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier edge.
The hydroflow system is deemed a safety mitigation device. The victory of Varick Apex stands. However, the system is banned for the rest of the season. It's too dangerous to allow others to try and replicate it. They couldn't replicate it if they tried, Jean-Pierre, I said, a small, weary smile playing on my lips. They don't have the blueprints. We walked out of the FIA building and into the cool evening air of Monte Carlo. The harbor was glowing with the lights of 1,000 yachts. Christian was already on the phone, likely doubling the price for our 2027 engine contracts, but I didn't care about the money. We walked down to the Varick Apex garage. It was empty now, the smell of burnt oil and champagne still lingering. Leo was there, sitting on a tire stack, his trophy resting at his feet. He looked up and grinned. "We keeping the cup, boss?" "We're keeping the cup, Leo," I said. I looked at my father. He was standing by the workbench, looking at the restored tools. He picked up the chrome wrench and handed it to me. "Where to next, Elena?" he asked. "The Varick factory needs a total overhaul. The R&D department is a mess, and I think I'm ready to retire. Truly this time. I want to see what you do with the place when you're the one holding the keys." "I'm going to build a car that doesn't need a vacuum to win, Marcus. I'm going to build a car that's so fast the wind has to run just to keep up." We walked out of the garage together, the Oracle and the Legend, leaving the ghosts of the past in the rear-view mirror. The road ahead was long, and the corners would be tight, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting the headwind. I had learned to make it my own. The Phoenix hadn't just risen, it had flown. And I was at the controls.